This thing it's a two-party agreement. From that initial document that was produced, there are two parties. Because remember, who was the lawyer the DOJ negotiating for? And who was the DOJ negotiating with? Donald Trump. So Donald Trump has to be a signatory to whatever is agreed on, and he's not. So folks, y'all getting rooked out there if you believe that Donald Trump, A, is not going to reimagine the slush fund and it will come back, and B, is going to be immune from any prosecution from all the criminal activity that he's doing right now in front of us. So that's all. I just don't even understand.
We're working to get this sound from Senator Tillis because our colleague Michael Chanel just spoke to him actually on Capitol Hill. So we'll get the sound turned for you, but I'm just going to read from the verbate because Tillis said he believes the Trump administration will abide by the terms, and if Trump reneges, quote, he'd have to explain how breaking what I think is a very clear commitment squares with being honest and being the president of the United States, end quote, because the president cares about being honest.
Like, in what world
this president, he cares.
In what world will it matter? At that point, Todd Blanche will probably be confirmed. At that point, the world would have moved on. At that point, Donald Trump got what he really wanted, which is the immunity for him and his sons retroactively. So what does it matter if you let the vote go through? And this is the thing that is frustrating for a lot of normal people out there when they look at senators and they see them, they stand up and they say, I'm not going to do it. And then you have, they're just, it's feckless over and over and over again. Over and over and over again.
I don't know why we elect these people. I just don't understand why we elect them, because they are the most weak, servile, incompetent leaders, and I use that word in the worst possible sense, in these jobs in this era. When the country needs men and women to stand up, who have good faith with the Constitution, these folks stay seated on their flat butts, doing absolutely nothing. And they lie to you. They look in your face and they lie to you. They pretend they're going to do something and then they don't. And I don't understand. And just answer me this one question. Can this get undone with some future administration coming in and saying, this crap is not going to stand? I don't care what kind of agreement this president has. The IRS is not going to protect you from the criminal activity, number one. And number two, the slush fund is gone.
Yeah, well, that's exactly what a future administration will do. But this is the trap that they set. And you kind of laid the foundation for this. You're a lawyer. You're talking about the original settlement between Donald Trump and the IRS said, we are immune from any sort of audit in perpetuity. And this agreement can only be modified by both parties in writing. This is a unilateral modification of the agreement. Donald Trump purportedly has had no role in this. So, what happens is if you have a future president that tries to enforce this, you're going to have Donald Trump and his businesses say, doesn't work like that. We had an agreement. It wasn't modified in writing, agreed to by both parties. So they are really setting up to make exactly that situation impossible.
Couldn't Trump technically sue the DOJ for agreeing on his behalf? I was talking to a lawyer. I was talking to an attorney earlier today who was saying the fact that Donald Trump hasn't signed on to this, that he hasn't signed on to change the original agreement that he signed on to, then he's not party to it. And frankly, he could sue the DOJ.
This isn't even a real agreement. This is not a real agreement. There was no settlement. So what are these lawyers talking about?
What makes it a real agreement other than the DOJ saying it's an agreement?
Yeah, exactly.
In the world we live in right now.
Adversity. Yeah. But we're talking about the IRS settlement, but there's a whole other part that I think is in some ways even more dangerous.
But wait, can you go back and answer what makes it a real agreement? Because it's my understanding that there was no settlement because they did not go back to court. They just decided on their own that, we're going to settle. But
and
there was
Trump's
no
DOJ. It's just not adversity.
And you don't have to be a lawyer. You're like, think about how lawsuits work. The two sides actually have to disagree with each other. And that's not what happened here. Donald Trump was suing his own IRS. The judge in Florida, Judge Williams, said there wasn't actual adversity. So there wasn't an actual, what lawyers call case or controversy. So there couldn't be a settlement in the first place. And one of the reasons why we know that this new commitment by Todd Blanche is so dishonest is the Department of Justice is still appealing that Florida decision. So they want to make sure that this agreement, the original agreement, is still enforceable.
Angelo?
Ooh.
Wait, is this breaking through in the MAGA-verse? Are the people on the Hannity radio shows calling in about the slush fund? I highly doubt.
No, and I think that the only person that's upset about all of this is Steve Bannon, and it's for the worst possible reasons. He's upset because it means that Todd Blanche is going to get confirmed, and he's been hoping that Todd Blanche failed so that somebody else crazier would get put in place.
He wants Bill Pulte, apparently.
That's exactly right.
Who is also not a lawyer.
And again, we're talking about a guy who is Donald Trump's personal lawyer that's doing all this stuff already for Trump. I mean, that's basically there to serve his moods and not the rule of law. But I think the fact that they're not up in arms or even mildly upset about it, it sort of gets back to the Cornyn and Tillis thing. Because from the outset, the fix was in. Everybody, they already had full consensus, okay, that this was here to serve Donald Trump, and they didn't give a damn about anything else. And about any of the corruption stuff, any of the self-dealing, the self-interest, what they saw was a political tool being installed in the Department of Justice that could then be weaponized against, the deep state, all of their opponents, the New York Times, the reporters, which he's already been doing as the acting, by the way. And so that, to me, is the reveal, is that Tillis and Cornyn, they're just a tiny little keyhole view into what has already been a fully baked-in consensus about this entire approach, and that's it. So, yeah.
Well, again, this is, I don't know how much of a headache the American people have out there after all of this. I mean, it just, to me, is just profoundly disappointing that this is what our country has come to. That we are no better than some 2-bit backwater, thuggish country with, some rotund Jabba the Hutt figure sitting in power, ordering and dictating, and everyone slovenly groping up to this individual to wipe the snot from his nose.
Lord.
And I'm just so...
Please, the picture has been painted.
Well, no, because that's what this is. You need to understand what this is. Because that's what we look like. That's what we feel like as a country to me right now. And so I don't know how we turn this corner. I don't even know in some cases if elections will be enough, because it really does matter who is on the ballot. You, Angelo, you've got your finger on the pulse out there in this country. You're seeing the folks who are trying to jockey and position themselves into power so they can become the next Charlie Kirk or the next fill in the blank. What are you hearing and seeing out there in terms of folks looking where this goes? And are they okay with that?
Where the power is being organized right now is in the Groypers, the Nick Fuentes parts of the world. I mean, the little things that you see with Tucker, these flare-ups, that is him actually trying to grapple onto where the kinetic energy is on the right, which is actually much scarier and darker than the power that Donald Trump built and organized on the fringes to put himself into office these last 2 times. So we shouldn't ignore that fact. And meanwhile, as that's happening, as that's where the future trends are going, Trump is out there working the phones, calling existing right-wing media figures, promising, Glenn Beck, for example, calling him and telling him, "Ooh, there's big, huge prosecutions coming just around the corner," at least according to Glenn Beck, and that's what he's out there doing. And it's a reflection of what he thinks Todd Blanche is going to do once he gets confirmed. So in the short term, he's trying to keep everybody at bay, like, you're going to get something right now. But meanwhile, as you know, what's really happening around the bend is they're building and organizing power in the darkest and worst possible places of the far right.
There are other payout methods for these January 6ers. And I think people should be reminded that the president himself has continuously advocated for these people that took up arms against the United States government, I would argue. People who sought to stop the certification of the ballots that said Joe Biden and Kamala Harris were the duly elected president and vice president. People who beat police officers. The president said that those people who were convicted, some of them by jury of their peers, some of them by judges, that they were treated unfairly and they need compensation. He pardoned them, and now he wants them to get paid. He wants to make sure his little militia feels very good in the lead up to this election.
And
but there are other methods.
Again,
yeah, some
for heinous crimes.
And they're like, they trying to argue in court. Well, the pardon covers this as well. And it's like, sorry, the pedophilia is not covered under the pardon. I'm not making it up, folks. Look it up. It has happened. But there are other payout methods. So it's not just this slush fund. The Hill has a headline. The Guardian has a headline. Politico, MS Now. DOJ has other routes to payouts beyond Trump anti-weaponization fund. January 6th defendants pursue millions in claims through obscure federal process. The Federal Tort Claims Act the Trump administration to pay nearly $5 million in wrongful death suit of January 6th rioter Ashley Babbitt shot by police. And then there's this financial settlement with Michael Flynn.
Mm-hmm. So if there are other ways, then why this fund?
Exactly.
Counsel?
Well, and that's the real.
I was looking at Simone.
Yeah.
But I'm like, do tell.
Well, and we should talk about the law, but there's almost kind of a psychological aspect to this, which is you said these people took up arms against the government. They took up arms specifically against John Cornyn and Tom Tillis. Like, these are the people that specifically tried to kill these guys. And they're
It was on the ground. Up in the,
about to sign off on giving money to the people that tried to kill them. I don't understand how some senators' brains work. But on the legal side,
that was my first point.
Yeah, exactly. So what they're going to do, presumably, is if they can't actually specifically set up the weaponization fund, they're going to settle claims through what's called the FTCA, which can either be brought in an open lawsuit or, much more concerningly, as an administrative complaint against the Department of Justice, which never needs to be made public. So potentially you can funnel millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to these people without ever making a public court filing.
See, the fact that all of these other ways exist, to me, continues to make the point that the point of all of this, the point of the fund, was a signal. It was a signal to the January 6th folks. It was a signal to Trump folks to say, Angelo, I have your back. Because, going around like the Federal Tort Claims Act got your back. That doesn't work. But I, Donald Trump, worked with my DOJ to create a fund where you can get money. That is the point. And they are, I assume, understanding that.
They totally get that. And we shouldn't ignore the fact that authoritarianism, fascism, it's theater, especially in its early days. And this is a big part of it. And even if the mechanics get lost, they still sort of get the ultimate takeaway, which is that Trump is out there willing to make these settlements. There's plenty of people. Michael Flynn got money. They think if they sue, they're going to get money. And so that means going forward that they'll be protected if they were to do other types of extra legal things in order to, steal elections or save democracy from their perspective.
Well, Michael Steele has put a good question on the table. It's like, how could America, y'all elected these people. America did elect these people, and there is another election coming up. Prior to we get to that, before that election, though, there is tomorrow at the Senate Judiciary Committee where maybe the Republicans aren't afraid of the Democrats. That is what this portends to me. Maybe the Republican Party apparatus are not afraid of the Democrats at all. And I say that because...
Why would they be?
Well, I guess they haven't shown that they have teeth. So maybe the Democrats need to be willing to do something insane, like put the ads up, something crazy, just to let people know that you are not going to get away with playing the American people.